Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this special legal compliance update run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. This is a fairly succinct session that we are running. It is focused on the COVID check-in marshals and the COVID marshals themselves. We are going to be running through some of the work health and safety obligations as well that support this process and what your compliance obligations are. In saying that, since Victoria has eased its lockdown rules, the role of COVID marshals is now coming to the forefront for agencies as well. So what we're just going to run through here is specifically what COVID marshals are. We've taken information directly from the Department of Health website around the Victorian guidelines for this as well. We will be sending all of this material around to all of the attendees today. But importantly, what we're going to also look at is what are some of the practical measures that we have advised agencies to do over the last few weeks now, since this has come up, but also what other agencies are doing to meet some of these requirements as well for you. As always, we are recording this webinar, and it will be sent out to all registered attendees as well, along with copies of these slides. As always, we pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So the role of COVID marshals has been introduced by the Victorian government, specifically focusing on creating a COVID-safe workplace. Now, as part of this, what we are seeing, and this is just a diagram that I have up, what we are seeing is COVID marshals being positioned at various entrance and exit points as well, but also being shared in some of the roles like administration and receptionist staff too. Essentially, the role of the COVID marshal, which we will come to, is to provide that safety and assurance for people that are visiting your site, and also for staff as well too. So they have a bit of a dual function in this. We are going to cover what is a COVID check-in marshal and what are they expected to do, who appoints them, what is the training that is required for COVID check-in marshals, and also looking at can a worker be assigned to the role of both a COVID check-in marshal and a COVID marshal at the same time. I'm going to add to this that we are also going to look at specifically the work health and safety obligations. We're joined by compliance officers, compliance managers, risk managers, general operations managers, HR managers today. And obviously with this role as COVID marshals that are being rolled out in your agency, there is also a work health and safety obligation, specifically under certain roles that I will discuss, that also you need to ensure compliance of these marshals themselves as well. So let's go through that. Essentially, before going into the COVID marshals' roles and responsibilities, the purpose of this essentially falls under work health and safety obligations. Now, officers and directors need to ensure that they meet their work health and safety roles and obligations. This means that essentially, if you're by definition, if you're an officer of a company, and many of you that are joining us are in your current role as operations manager, HR manager, if you're assigned in your role to look after COVID compliance, if you're a risk manager as well too, sitting as executive assistants with CEOs and the likes, then essentially what we are seeing is an officer-based role that is defined under the work health and safety guidelines. This means in your capacity, in this compliance capacity, you are required to ensure that your agency meets its due diligence under COVID safety obligations. And this is something around, and we've got a checklist here from Safe Work around some of the things that your role will need to do. And over the past few weeks, we have been talking about in our other webinars about COVID safety and work health and safety obligations. In some of the legal updates that we've sent out, we've looked at the increasing role of work health and safety legislation, specifically to ensure safety in the workplace when it does come to COVID-19. In saying that, if I can just jump to your GEMBA dashboard, you will find that already, and this is from our previous legal update that we have sent around, that you do have a COVID-19 risk assessment form that covers exactly what I'm talking about here already around specific requirements and risk assessments that your agency should complete. And this essentially builds off exactly what we're talking about here. So really your legal obligation, legal compliance obligation as an officer for your agency and representative agency is to ensure that you meet and you keep up to date with your work health and safety obligations. And this includes ensuring you have control measures in place and regularly consulting with workers and the HSR representatives on COVID-19 in your workplace and looking at ideas for eliminating or minimizing risks where you can. So let's have a look at what COVID Marshals, what they do and how agencies like yourselves are in fact rolling these positions out. I did have a chat with with a person this morning who is actually looking at their agency is actually looking at recruiting specifically for a COVID Marshal to address these as well too. So they're keen to obviously look at what roles and position descriptions and the like should be in place. So essentially the COVID Marshal is an important role that keeps workplaces COVID safe at all times. They are responsible for monitoring a site's compliance with COVID safety and also looking at additional industry-specific obligations. The role, according to the Department of Health, is to support workers to follow COVID-safe principles and look for ways to continually improve the COVID-safe plans, entry screening, physical distancing, personal protective equipment, workplace bubbles, hygiene, cleaning, and record-keeping requirements as well. Now, on this, one of the things that I will add here is that the importance of daily attestation forms. This is something that agencies are continuing to do by and large. It is not just looking at the QR codes, it is also looking at the daily attestation forms. Now, with those, there is the requirement from the Department of Health in certain parts of the community and health services sector, aged care sector as well too, to ensure that staff are free from symptoms. And so with it, there is, and I will come to the actual guideline document in this, but you do have access to your COVID-19 daily attestation form, which covers off essentially whether staff have actually come into contact with any of the outbreak or confirmed hotspot areas. And where there are cases or locations, you can see that we've got the link here. And when you click on that, that will actually give you the latest update directly to the department site that jumps out from your GEMBA dashboard. So essentially, agencies are using this to ensure that staff are free from COVID symptoms, irrespective of whether they've actually had the vaccine or not. Now, with it, what is a COVID check-in marshal and what are they expected to do? Now, the COVID check-in marshal is an employee responsible for ensuring each person who enters your venue does log into the Service Victoria QR code upon arrival. It means that a COVID check-in marshal can only request that people entering show them confirmation of a successful check-in and cannot compel anyone to do so, which is an unusual kind of position to actually be in around this, where they are actually looking at where they are only looking at specific areas. And we have had a question from Rebecca just in regards to the Department of Health website says that COVID marshals are only required in certain industries. The list doesn't include community health centres. Do you have any different or updated information which states that community health centres do have to have a COVID marshal? Thank you, Rebecca. That's a really good point around this. Part of this was around, and you are correct, that the Department of Health hasn't actually specifically listed. They've listed hospitals, they've listed other services such as quarantine hotels, and other services areas as well. The mandatory nature of this is that the department, you are correct, has not specifically listed community health centres on this. What we have approached this as is to look at how you could have this in place, specifically around meeting your work health and safety obligations as well. And we see this with even women's housing refuge sites where they might run multiple sites as well too, specifically for agencies, and where essentially the check-in marshals have been taken within some community health centres, is to actually look at receptionists or administrators, front of office administrators, actually picking up this role. And that actually includes even for specific health and medical service areas too. So where that is the case, essentially we've looked at this from a work health and safety point of view and looked at how specific roles can actually be, I'm going to say, dovetailed into these check-in marshal areas. So essentially where people are actually coming in. At this stage, it hasn't been listed directly on the Department of Health website, but essentially under work health and safety obligations, this is where we're actually looking at, well, how can you meet these requirements specifically as a director or officer of the company in order to do that as well too. So if a person refuses to show evidence of a successful check-in, the COVID marshal can ask that person not to enter the venue. If the person does not comply with the request, the COVID marshal is not required or encouraged to enforce the refusal of entry. That said, around it, health services and medical services are generally asking people to confirm their details, or if they are not if they're refusing to in fact do so, then from a work health and safety point of view, we are aware that some agencies are actually taking details of who has checked in and who hasn't actually done that as well. So who appoints a COVID check-in marshal? Essentially, the Department of Health have placed this back on the agencies responsible for this as well. And again, under work health and safety obligations, what we're finding is that to try and ensure that you do have you meet your obligations to ensure that you have a safe work environment and trying to minimize risks appropriately. Essentially, we're finding that the management of this is run by either the risk or operational managers or compliance managers, but essentially it is being left directly to the front of house receptionist in order to bring this to manage this process. Ensuring that QR codes are prominently displayed at every entrance is one of the work health and safety obligations, and providing devices that kiosk check-in is set up to assist people who cannot check in as well too. And some agencies have taken it upon themselves to actually do that as part of that additional process. Employers may need to appoint more than one check-in marshal if there are multiple entrances to the venues. A lot of health centres, community service organisations, schools have seen this as well too, where they are taking attendance at drop-off as well too, where people are driving in, and essentially limiting the entrances to venues rather than leaving them open. Now, obviously, that what comes from this is what is the training required for COVID check-in marshals. And this is again from the Department of Health website where they've taken this information, and on one hand, they've said COVID check-in marshals are not required to complete any role-specific training, though employers should provide guidance where practical to ensure that COVID check-in marshals understand their role and what they are required to do. Now, in saying that, employers, as the Department of Health have pointed out after this, is that employers should note that their work, health and safety obligations remain under the Health and Safety Act 2004. Now, in saying that, what this means is that workers must comply with their obligations under legislation. So what we're finding with the Department of Health information, which is why we're running this session today, and rightly that Rebecca has raised this question this morning, is that on one hand, the department have said, look, we're making it mandatory for certain industries around this, where we're looking at quarantine hotels, we're looking at hospitals, other certain industries, community health centres, while they haven't been listed on the list. The Department of Health have then turned around on this and said, oh, but also be aware that you also need to meet your occupational health and safety obligations. And doing this, how do you then minimize risks in a reasonable way when guidelines have been put out about COVID check-in marshals and COVID marshals? So what we've seen agencies do and other community health centres do is to ensure that they've got policies around this information. Quite simply, they've cut and pasted information in around what information, what the check-in marshal's roles should be, checklists to help and help sheets to be used just to remind people of, well, what do you do if somebody does check in, or if someone refuses to check in? Do you keep their details separately, so you've got a list of who hasn't actually checked in on this as well too? Other community health centres have avoided that, because what they've done is actually then use their own appointment schedules and confirm when people have and they can rapidly confirm who's actually attended the site, even if they haven't actually checked in as well too. We were asked whether agencies need to keep a separate register of this. And look, our answer at this stage was, if people have refused to check in, you obviously, even the department has said you can't compel them to do so. For community health centres specifically, where they are coming in for an appointment, obviously you've got those details of people that have attended at any specific time and at any specific site, and how long they've actually been there as well too. For those that are attending as support workers, especially within disability services or refugee centres as well too, in those circumstances, we have suggested that you do keep a list if people haven't checked in and they haven't provided you that information. It is slightly different than going into a shopping centre or Coles area, for example, or Woolworths or Bunnings or the likes, where those areas are mandatory and people may refuse entry around that, and that's their policy that they've also put up as well too. Now, one of the questions that we have also been asked from an HR point of view is, can one worker be assigned the role of both a COVID check-in marshal and a COVID marshal at the same time? Now, remember, a check-in marshal is there to make sure that people are checking in, essentially, and a COVID marshal is to monitor the whole site itself. So people have said, look, can we get somebody to do that for us? And essentially, when assigning workers to the role of COVID check-in marshal or COVID marshal, agencies should consider the responsibilities and requirements of each role. A worker can only be assigned both roles at the same time if they have the capacity and ability to do it, obviously. So with this, agencies must assign the check-in marshals to each venue entrance to ensure that people do check in. Now, as part of that, one of the things that has come up is what is the functions that COVID marshals do perform. And part of that, and some of these roles may actually be shared across different positions, as I have mentioned. COVID marshals monitor compliance with COVID safe plans, including additional specific industry obligations, provide response about failings to their agency and health service representatives. So they also encourage and coach workers on safe working practices too. So in some ways too, again, picking up the question that was asked before, while you may not specifically have a COVID marshal nominated in certain parts of the community services sector, these components of these roles would fall well within your work health and safety obligations too. Now, COVID marshals, according to the department, must wear clothing or an identifying badge that makes their role clear to co-workers. COVID marshals must not face discrimination or any adverse action for discharging their duties as well too. So as part of that, what is important to remember, according to the Department of Health, is that a COVID marshal is not an health and safety expert unless they're appropriate qualifications and experience. They're not a health and safety representative and is not undertaking disciplinary or punitive role. So essentially the roles is about, according to the Department of Health, ensuring education and encouraging co-workers to comply with their COVID safe plans. Non-compliance around this should be dealt by the management group in the usual way. So this is why we're starting to suggest that your agency look at policy requirements and also set out what type of records your agency should be keeping. So that includes things like duty rosters for COVID marshals as well too, and also the process to appoint each COVID marshal, including consultation with health and safety representatives too. One of the things that I've mentioned, and I keep on mentioning this, is around daily attestation registers. The Department of Health actually issued these in, I think, September last year, and it was around ensuring that staff, our volunteers, and contract workers on things like even clinical placements do complete a daily attestation form to confirm that they are free from symptoms around and related to COVID-19. Essentially, the daily attestations, and we've seen agencies like refugee agencies that provide outreach work to aged care services have picked this up and are running with it incredibly well. We also know that women's housing services like Women's Housing Limited, and I do shout out to Lindy Parker, who has joined us today as well too, from Women's Housing Limited. They continue to actually use these attestation registers from week to week, and that has worked well for a number of months in terms of ensuring that staff are free from any COVID symptoms. So it is something that is still required from your agency to use as well too. Rumbalara have continued to use the daily attestation registers and also check-in details like Women's Housing Limited, and you can see that on your GEMBA form. Essentially, your GEMBA dashboard has access to these resources already as well, and it is there for yourselves to use, and we encourage you to actually do it. And where you can actually find these tools to actually use, you'll see the COVID daily attestation form, which gives you the check-in screening, sorry, not the check-in, the screening of whether staff have any of the COVID symptoms, and it also connects directly to the Department of Health case locations and outbreak locations as well. What it gives you is the date and time that the staff member has completed it and allows that quick, easy reference. In terms of your work health and safety obligations and your required compliance obligations, we suggest using the COVID risk assessment form. This was something that we pulled from the Safe Work website. It is updated from time to time as Safe Work update their check-ins that they want people to actually do and show what they've done as well too. And that is located under the COVID-19 risk assessment form that is also on your website. In terms of your obligations and recommendations coming out of this, what we are suggesting you do is review your COVID safe policies and include the Marshal role, or where, if you don't have one, how that responsibilities are split across your different positions within your agencies. We also recommend, from a compliance point of view, that you do conduct your workplace audit checklist to ensure that you meet your obligations as well. If you do have any questions, by all means, reach out to our law firm. All of you do have my mobile number that's listed here, or you can reach out to us on our 1300 360 360 number or our support desk as well. I will also add that if you do have any questions while you are on your legal compliance dashboard, you will essentially see these informations listed here as well too. These little pop-up screens that allow you to chat with us directly and also share screens. So if you did need direct assistance from here, you can also use these chat buttons. They will also appear on all of your forms as well too, down the bottom on the left-hand side, and that is a resource that is directly there for yourselves to use. We will open up the phone lines, and more than happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that people might have. If you are watching this webinar as through a recording, by all means, please contact us on our listed numbers here again, and we're more than happy to support yourselves and ensure that you are supported through this COVID pandemic period.